Windows Longhorn, the rotting giant. In the early 2000s, Microsoft attempted to build the OS of the future. Codenamed Longhorn, it was supposed to feature a revolutionary file system and a 3D interface that would change everything. But instead of a masterpiece, they built a monster. The code was so bloated and interconnected that the OS began to rot from the inside out. Developers would fix one bug, and 10 more would appear in totally unrelated features. It was a memory-leaking nightmare that became so unstable it was essentially unusable. By 2004, Microsoft realized they were steering a sinking ship. They famously hit the reset button, trashing years of work to build what eventually became the much-maligned Windows Vista. Today, surviving builds of Longhorn are like digital fossils, ghostly, broken remnants of a future that was too bloated to exist. Using it today feels like walking through a half-finished mansion where the walls are melting and the floor disappears beneath your feet. It is a billion-dollar monument to corporate hubris, a cursed prototype that was so broken it nearly took the world's largest software company down with it. If you find a copy online, be warned, it doesn't just run poorly, it feels like it's actively dying while you watch. Suicide Linux, type or die. We've all made a typo. Usually, you just hit backspace and move on with your life. In Suicide Linux, a typo is a death sentence for your data. This isn't just a bad operating system, it's a high-stakes psychological experiment. It's a standard Debian-based distribution, but with one cursed modification. Any command that isn't recognized by the shell is automatically redirected to a script that wipes your entire hard drive. For the non-coders out there, that is the digital equivalent of a self-destruct button. It turns a simple session of checking emails or coding into a sweat-inducing game of Russian roulette. There is no "Are you sure?" prompt. There is no recycle bin. One fat finger mistake, typing SL instead of LS, and your entire digital life is vaporized in milliseconds. It turns the act of computing into a survival horror game. It's the ultimate git-gud of the tech world, and it's absolutely terrifying to witness. It's a system designed for the perfect, the arrogant, or the clinically insane. Most people who install it end up with a blank hard drive within 10 minutes, proving that in the world of Suicide Linux, the only winning move is not to type at all. Apartheid OS, the poisoned kernel. The cursed nature of software isn't always about bugs. Sometimes it's about the soul of the creator. Apartheid OS is a 2012 Linux distribution that is widely considered the most toxic piece of software ever compiled. Created by an anonymous white supremacist group, the OS was customized with hateful imagery, racist fonts, and built-in tools designed for online harassment and extremist coordination. It's a digital artifact of pure bile. Because it was hosted on obscure servers and eventually scrubbed by web hosts, it has become a dark legend in the Linux community. Most people who go looking for it today find nothing but broken links and warnings from cybersecurity experts. It is cursed not just because of its content, but because of its sticky nature. It was reportedly bundled with malware that made it difficult to uninstall, as if the OS itself wanted to infect your hardware with its ideology. It serves as a grim reminder that code can be a weapon of hate, a digital scar on the history of open source software that most people would prefer to stay buried forever. It is the dark web of operating systems, a place where no one should ever want to boot up. The Null OS alien logic. Most programming languages are designed for humans to eventually understand. Then there's Malbolge, named after the 8th circle of hell. It was designed to be impossible to program. Now, imagine an operating system written in that or other esoteric languages. These Null OS experiments feel like they were written by an alien intelligence that doesn't understand human thought. The logic is circular, the commands are nonsensical, and the output is often just noise or flashing colors. Navigating these systems feels like a digital fever dream, where the laws of physics have been replaced by static. There is no start menu. There is only a void of incomprehensible symbols that seem to change every time you look at them. It's the cursed OS for the elite, those who want to prove they can speak a language that was literally designed to be unspoken. It's software as a Lovecraftian ritual. The more you try to understand how it works, the more your own brain feels like it's crashing. It's not just user-unfriendly, it is actively hostile to the concept of being understood. It is a ghost in the machine that speaks in a tongue no living person was ever meant to hear. Pony OS, the uncanny valley. On the surface, Pony OS looks like a joke or a colourful prank. It's a hobbyist OS based on My Little Pony, filled with neon pinks, bright blues, and big-eyed cartoon characters staring back at you from every window. But that's what makes it truly cursed, the uncanny valley effect. Underneath the sparkles and the pony icons is a shockingly competent, fully functional Unix-like kernel called Toru OS. The amount of genuine, high-level engineering talent poured into a system designed for bronies is staggering. It feels wrong to perform complex system administration or C-level coding while being cheered on by a neon pink cartoon horse. It's a psychological fever dream that blurs the line between a serious technical achievement and a meme that went way too far. It's the kind of thing you'd find on a computer in a horror movie right before the lights go out. Using it makes you feel like you're trapped in a 2012 internet forum that has gained sentience. It is the pinkest, most polished nightmare you will ever boot from a USB drive, proving that sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones wrapped in the brightest packaging. Chaos OS. Hardware Russian roulette. While most cursed systems attack your data or your sanity, Chaos OS attacks your wallet. This is an experimental kernel where the basic logic of the computer is tied to a true random number generator. In a normal computer, the command to open file does exactly that. In Chaos OS, the computer might decide that open file actually means delete kernel or send random emails. But the truly cursed part is its lack of hardware safeguards. It has been known to randomly overclock processors to dangerous levels or disable cooling fans just to see how the system reacts to the heat. It treats the physical components of your computer as disposable resources in a chaotic game of chance. It is quite literally a suicidal kernel. Running it isn't just a risk to your files, it's a physical risk to the machine sitting on your desk. There have been reports of hobbyists running Chaos OS only to have their motherboards literally start smoking as the OS decided to pump maximum voltage into the circuits for no reason. It is the forbidden fruit of the hardware world, a system that is only happy when it is destroying itself. Lisp machines, the lost civilization. In the 1980s, these weren't just computers, they were the god-tier machines of the early AI world. Lisp machines were designed to run a language so advanced and flexible it felt like magic. But when the AI winter hit, the companies went bankrupt almost overnight, leaving these incredibly powerful, thinking machines to become literal e-waste. Booting one up today feels like performing a seance in a graveyard. You are interacting with a dead branch of computer evolution, a system that was smarter and more modular than the Macs and PCs we use today, but was simply abandoned by history. The UI is alien, the keyboard has more keys than a piano, and the whole experience feels like finding a working smartphone in an ancient Egyptian tomb. It is the ghost of a future we weren't ready for. There's an eerie silence when you use one. You can feel the complexity of a lost civilization humming in the circuits. It's a reminder that in the tech world, being the best doesn't mean you survive. These machines are the haunted relics of a digital Atlantis, waiting for someone to wake them up and realize what we lost. Amiga OS, the undead survivor. Finally, we have the Zombie OS. Amiga OS was the king of the late 80s, offering graphics and sound that wouldn't be matched by Windows for a decade. But when its parent company, Commodore, went bankrupt in 1994, the OS entered a cursed cycle of undeath. For over 30 years, the rights to the OS have been passed between failing companies, fought over in endless, soul-crushing lawsuits, and resurrected by a cult-like community that refuses to let it stay buried. It shouldn't exist in 2026. It has no right to still be getting updates or having new hardware developed for it. And yet, there is a global network of Amiga files who treat it like a holy relic. It is a digital ghost kept on life support by sheer willpower. Using it today feels like stepping into an alternate dimension where 1995 never ended. It is a zombie that refuses to stay in its grave, proving that sometimes a cursed OS is simply one that is too stubborn to disappear. It is the ultimate survivor, a flickering light from the past that refuses to be blown out by the winds of progress. BOS. BOS was created in the early 90s by ex-Apple executives who thought, what if an operating system was actually fast? And they weren't kidding. BOS was so smooth it made Windows and classic Mac OS look like they were running through mud. It was designed for multimedia before the term was even cool. Instant boot times, real-time audio processing, and insanely responsive Windows that felt ahead of everything else on the market. The problem wasn't the tech, it was everything around it. Almost no hardware manufacturers supported it, developers didn't make software for it, and consumers had absolutely no idea it existed. Even worse, when B tried to partner with Apple, negotiations went nowhere. Apple instead bought Next, and BOS was left standing like someone who showed up to the wrong wedding. Eventually, the company sold its intellectual property, and BOS faded into tech folklore. Funny enough, its ideas lived on in Haiku OS, a fan-made revival built by people who still refused to admit BOS died. BOS wasn't bad, it just tried to win a race that nobody allowed it to enter. Its legacy lives on in multimedia enthusiasts and OS historians who still marvel at how an operating system could feel so alive, so responsive, and so ahead of its time, yet vanish almost entirely from the public consciousness, leaving only whispers of what could have been. Morph OS. Morph OS is what happens when a fan base refuses to move on. It's a modernized operating system inspired by the legendary Amiga OS, built to run on PowerPC hardware long after the rest of the world moved to Intel and ARM. That alone should tell you its destiny. Morph OS is actually fast, efficient, lightweight, and beautifully designed, but it's supported by a microscopic community and runs on incredibly niche machines. Basically, if you use Morph OS, you either truly love retro computing or you live in a secret tech bunker underground. The developer team is small but dedicated, and the OS is updated regularly, which makes it even more impressive and confusing. It's like discovering someone still updates their MySpace page every week. Realistically, Morph OS never stood a chance in the mainstream. No major app support, no big manufacturers, and absolutely no reason for average people to care. But as a passion project, it's kind of legendary. It exists not because the market demanded it, but because a handful of people refused to let a beautiful idea die quietly. Morph OS is a living museum, a reminder that some operating systems survive purely on love, dedication, and stubbornness, proving that even in a world dominated by giants, small communities can keep a dream alive, polished, and surprisingly functional decades later. Apple's forgotten Unix hybrid. Before macOS was cool, Apple experimented with a very weird idea, mixing classic Mac with Unix power. That experiment was called a UX. It ran on Macintosh hardware, but secretly had Unix underneath, meaning you could use command line tools like a hacker while clicking icons like a designer. Sounds like the perfect mix of brains and beauty, right? In reality, it was complicated, slow, and completely confusing to its target audience. Regular Mac users didn't understand it. Unix professionals didn't trust it, developers ignored it. But here's the funny part. UX basically predicted the future. macOS today is built on Unix principles, just packaged in a way that doesn't make your soul leave your body. UX wasn't appreciated in its time because the world wasn't ready for a hybrid system. Technology just hadn't caught up with the vision. After a few versions, Apple quietly killed it and moved on. It's now remembered as the strange cousin of macOS nobody invites to family gatherings, but technically, it was right all along. Its influence is subtle but undeniable. The idea that a consumer-friendly interface could sit atop a powerful, stable Unix core is now standard, and UX was the first to attempt it. In hindsight, it's a fascinating glimpse at Apple's willingness to experiment, even if the market wasn't ready, and a reminder that some innovations are simply ahead of their time. Inferno OS. Inferno sounds like a metal band, but it's actually an operating system created by Bell Labs as a successor to Plan 9. It was designed to be incredibly portable and run on basically anything: PCs, phones, small embedded devices, even gaming consoles. The entire system revolved around a virtual machine and a special programming language called Limbo, which already scared away 95% of developers. Inferno treated everything like a file and focused on network distribution way before cloud computing was mainstream. In theory, it was genius. In practice, nobody wanted to learn a new language, new tools, and a new philosophy just to run basic applications. It also had absolutely no marketing power behind it. So Inferno became one of the most advanced operating systems nobody ever used. It didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it demanded too much from a world that just wanted Windows icons and a start menu. Somewhere, there's probably still an engineer whispering, "You just didn't get it," to an empty room. Despite its obscurity, Inferno's concepts influenced distributed computing and virtualized environments, and its approach to treating resources as files inspired later systems. It remains a cult favorite among OS enthusiasts who appreciate its elegance, portability, and radical design philosophy, a reminder that sometimes the most brilliant ideas are too early for the world to embrace, leaving only a small, devoted following to keep the flame alive. Minix. Minix is one of the most influential operating systems in history that almost nobody outside of computer science has heard of. It was created as a learning tool to teach students how operating systems actually work. It used a microkernel design, which means it separated critical functions into tiny pieces for better stability and security. Sounds boring until you realize this is what directly inspired Linux. Yes, the most powerful open-source OS on Earth started as a reaction to Minix. While Linux went on to dominate servers, supercomputers, and the internet, Minix stayed in the shadows, like the older sibling who helped you get famous and then vanished. Even crazier, a version of Minix has been found running inside Intel chips as part of their management engine, meaning it's probably been inside your computer this entire time without you even knowing. Minix didn't fail, it just became too important behind the scenes to need recognition. It's not a star, it's a ghost running your hardware empire. Its educational roots continue to influence OS design, teaching generations of students about microkernels, modularity, and system architecture. Minix's quiet presence in modern computing is a testament to the power of ideas over fame, proving that an operating system doesn't need millions of users to leave a permanent mark on technology and the way we think about software design. Nextep. Nextep wasn't just an operating system, it was a resurrection plan. Built by Steve Jobs after he was kicked out of Apple, Nextep ran on Next computers and focused on developers, universities, and high-end users. It was incredibly advanced, true object-oriented programming, modern graphical interface, powerful multitasking, and tools that made existing systems look prehistoric. It was also wildly expensive and targeted at a very small audience. Next computers didn't sell well, and most people never touched Nextep in their life. But here's where it gets insane. Apple bought Next in 1997, Steve Jobs came back, and Nextep evolved into Mac OS X and eventually modern Mac OS and iOS. So technically, if you own an iPhone or Mac today, you're using a descendant of a failed operating system. Nextep didn't win the battle, it became the entire future. That's the quietest revenge story in tech history. Windows Vista. Windows Vista is what happens when an operating system focuses way too hard on looking pretty and forgets that computers actually need to function. Microsoft hyped it up as the future: shiny glass effects, fancy animations, improved security, and the infamous Aero interface that made your desktop look like it was carved out of crystal. The problem? Running Vista felt like your computer was dragging a boulder through mud. It demanded more RAM, more processing power, more patience, and more emotional resilience than most machines in 2007 could possibly offer. User account control constantly popped up, asking permission for literally everything, which made users feel like they were in an abusive relationship with their own computer. Drivers didn't work, software kept breaking, and people immediately started downgrading back to Windows XP like survivors escaping a disaster zone. Even PC manufacturers were begging Microsoft for mercy so they could ship computers with XP instead. The irony is that Vista wasn't completely terrible at its core. It introduced technologies that later made Windows 7 successful, but by the time it stabilized, its reputation was already in the digital grave. Vista wasn't just an OS, it was a lesson in how hype, poor optimization, and bad timing can destroy a product before it ever gets a chance to redeem itself. Mac OS 13. Ventura introduced Stage Manager, which instantly divided humanity into two groups: people who said, "This is life-changing," and people who said, "Why is there a pile of tiny windows staring at me?" It was bold, weird, and surprisingly useful once you forced your brain to accept it. Stage Manager let you organize windows into neat clusters, reducing desktop chaos, but it also made some users feel like their Mac was suddenly judging them for having too many open tabs. Ventura also brought passkeys, which promised to kill passwords forever, until websites said, "Cool idea, we're not ready," leaving users stuck in a limbo of futuristic security and old-school login forms. Spotlight got turbocharged, delivering faster, smarter search results that could even preview files without opening them. Continuity Camera turned your iPhone into a webcam so good it exposed how garbage MacBook webcams have always been, making Zoom calls slightly less soul-crushing. Performance improved across the board, animations got smoother, and the system felt snappy, even under heavy multitasking. But Ventura leaned hard into the iOSification of macOS: more rounded corners, more iPad-like menus, and deeper Apple Silicon optimization. Some veterans loved it, praising the polish and efficiency, while others insisted macOS was being slowly swallowed by iOS like a boa constrictor. Ventura wasn't revolutionary, but it was polished, efficient, modern, and undeniably a product of Apple's new unified ecosystem, bridging the gap between desktop and mobile in ways that felt both exciting and slightly unsettling. Microsoft Bob. Microsoft Bob launched in 1995 with confidence that only Microsoft could afford. It wasn't pitched as software, it was pitched as the future of computing for everyone. Instead of boring windows and menus, Bob gave you a cartoon house. Your email lived in the living room, your calendar was on the wall, programs were literal objects you clicked, like toys. It looked friendly, it sounded revolutionary, and it failed almost instantly. Why? Because Bob solved a problem nobody actually had while creating several new ones. It was slow, confusing, and somehow harder to use than the system it was trying to simplify. Users didn't feel empowered, they felt talked down to. Within months, adoption collapsed, retailers stopped pushing it, Microsoft quietly moved on. And Bob became a punchline, the software equivalent of an embarrassing haircut phase. The lesson here is brutal. Hype can get people to install something once, but usefulness is what makes them stay. Microsoft Bob didn't crash. It didn't break computers. It just revealed a timeless truth. If your operating system feels like a gimmick, people will treat it like one. Palm OS Cobalt. Palm OS Cobalt was supposed to be Palm's comeback story. By the early 2000s, Palm was in trouble. Smartphones were getting faster, more powerful, and more complex, and Palm OS was starting to feel old. So, Palm did what every struggling tech company does. They built a brand new operating system and hoped it would save them. Cobalt looked impressive on paper. True multitasking, better graphics, modern memory management. Basically, everything Palm OS users had been begging for. There was just one small, catastrophic issue. Nobody showed up. Developers didn't build apps for it. Hardware partners hesitated to commit. And Palm itself never fully pulled the trigger on real consumer devices. Cobalt lived in demos, conference presentations, and press releases, but not in stores. It was an operating system people talked about, not one they actually used. And that created a perfect loop of failure. No apps meant no users. No users meant no developers. And no momentum meant no future. Within a year, Palm quietly abandoned Cobalt and pivoted again, as if it had never existed. Palm OS Cobalt proves one brutal truth of computing. An operating system without an ecosystem isn't a platform. It's just a really ambitious idea that starved before it ever learned how to walk. HP WeBOS. WeBOS was good. Like, actually good. It was fast, smooth, and intuitive in a way most operating systems weren't at the time. Gestures felt natural. Multitasking worked like magic. You could flick apps around like physical cards, and somehow, it just made sense. Reviewers loved it. Tech fans were excited. For a moment, WeBOS felt like the future. Then HP got involved. HP bought Palm, inherited WeBOS, launched a few devices, and immediately lost confidence. Sales were slower than expected, inventory piled up, internal panic set in. Instead of fixing the strategy, HP pulled the plug. Within months, HP cancelled all consumer hardware running WeBOS. Not next year. Not after updates. Immediately. Developers watched this happen and walked away overnight. Why build apps for an OS with no devices? Users were left holding beautiful hardware with absolutely no future. WeBOS didn't fail because it was confusing or unstable. It failed because the flaw disappeared beneath it. An operating system cannot survive on praise alone. It needs devices, momentum, and belief. WeBOS became one of tech's greatest what-ifs. A reminder that even brilliant software dies when it loses the hardware war. IBM OS2 Warp. OS2 Warp wasn't a scrappy underdog. It was built by IBM, the company that practically invented modern computing. And it wasn't supposed to compete with Windows. It was supposed to replace it. OS2 began as a joint project between IBM and Microsoft. But when that partnership exploded, Microsoft walked away and focused entirely on Windows. IBM doubled down. OS2 Warp was powerful. It was stable. It could multitask better than Windows. And, most importantly, it could run many Windows programs, sometimes better than Windows itself. On paper, this was game over. In reality, it was a nightmare. Hardware support was inconsistent. Drivers were hard to find. Software compatibility worked just enough to be dangerous, close, but never perfect. Users didn't know who to trust. Developers didn't know where to commit. And IBM moved slowly, while Microsoft moved everywhere. Within a short time, Windows became the default. OS2 Warp faded into corporate backrooms and ATMs, literally. IBM OS2 Warp didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because ecosystems beat engineering. Replacing Windows overnight wasn't a feature. It was a losing war, no matter how good the OS was. Android 3.0 Honeycomb. Android Honeycomb existed for one reason: panic. In 2010, tablets were exploding in popularity. Apple's iPad had just arrived, and suddenly everyone wanted a big screen in their hands. Android, however, was not ready. So Google did what tech companies do under pressure. They rushed. Android 3.0 Honeycomb was built specifically for tablets, skipping phones entirely. It looked different. Menus floated, buttons moved, the interface tried to look futuristic. But under the surface, it felt unfinished. Apps weren't optimized because developers didn't know how. Performance was inconsistent because the system wasn't fully baked. Bugs appeared everywhere because Honeycomb was basically a public experiment. Users noticed immediately. Developers hated targeting it. Manufacturers struggled to make it feel stable, and Google knew it. Within a year, Honeycomb was quietly abandoned and absorbed into Android 4.0 as if it had never existed. No long-term support, no comeback story. Honeycomb didn't slowly fail. It was replaced before it could grow up. And it proved a painful rule of operating systems. Speed matters, but polish matters more. Because when an OS feels rushed, users feel like testers. And nobody wants their daily device to feel like a beta. Google Fuchsia. Google Fuchsia is one of the strangest operating systems ever created, not because it's bad, but because it's mysterious. From an engineering perspective, Fuchsia is impressive. It's fast, secure, modular, built completely from scratch instead of being patched together over decades like most operating systems. Engineers love it. They talk about it like a passion project. Regular users, however, had a different reaction. Confusion. When Fuchsia first appeared, nobody could explain what it was for. Was it replacing Android? Was it replacing Chrome OS? Was it meant for phones, laptops, smart displays, or all of them? Google didn't really say. There was no obvious pain it solved. Android already worked, Chrome OS already worked, and Fuchsia didn't make anything noticeably better for everyday users. So, excitement fizzled out. Development continued quietly behind the scenes, but public interest dropped fast. Not because Fuchsia failed, but because it never gave people a reason to care. And that's the trap. Innovation without context feels like noise. Potential without purpose feels irrelevant. Operating systems don't win by being impressive on paper. They win by fixing problems people actually feel. Until that happens, even the smartest OS in the room can feel invisible. Windows Phone 7. Windows Phone 7 launched with confidence that only Microsoft could project. The interface was bold. Tiles were alive, animations were smooth. It didn't look like iOS or Android, and that was the point. For the first time in years, Microsoft felt different. Early reviews were cautiously optimistic. The OS was fast, clean, and surprisingly enjoyable to use. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like the beginning of something. Then Microsoft panicked. Less than a year after launch, Microsoft announced Windows Phone 8, and here's the catch. Most Windows Phone 7 devices couldn't upgrade. Just like that, early adopters were stranded. Their phones worked, but had no future. Developers watched this happen and immediately pulled back. Why build apps for a platform that might reset itself every year? Why invest time in an ecosystem that eats its own users? Trust collapsed almost overnight. Windows Phone 7 didn't fail because it was buggy or slow. It failed because Microsoft broke the unspoken rule of operating systems. You don't abandon your believers. Once Microsoft moved on, carriers followed, developers followed, users followed. This OS didn't crash. It didn't burn out. It was quietly left behind. And in tech, that's the worst ending of all. Apple Newton OS. Apple's Newton OS arrived with enormous ambition and absolutely terrible timing. In the early 1990s, Apple wanted to invent the future of personal computing. Not desktops, not laptops. Something smaller. Something you could hold, write on, and carry everywhere. That future was Newton. The OS introduced ideas that sounded insane at the time. A handheld computer, a touchscreen, a stylus, and handwriting recognition instead of a keyboard. The problem was, none of it was ready. The hardware was slow, bulky, and expensive. And the handwriting recognition became infamous for hilariously misreading even simple words. Late-night comedians loved it, users did not. Within a few years, Apple killed the Newton platform entirely. But here's the twist. The ideas didn't fail, the timing did. Touch-first interfaces, mobile operating systems, stylus input. These concepts didn't disappear, they went dormant. Years later, Apple reintroduced them with better hardware, faster processors, and simpler design, and the world loved them. The Newton OS proves a brutal truth about operating systems. Being first doesn't mean winning. Being right too early can look exactly like failure. Some operating systems don't change the world directly. They wait and change it later, when the world is finally ready.